On the Schuylkill Expressway, traffic is either confession or punishment. The river runs like an old scar at our side, dark, silty, patient, and the brake lights stretch toward a bend that refuses to deliver its end. I sit behind the wheel of our Subaru, one heel tucked onto the edge of the floor mat the way I did when I was 16 in my mother's Civic, and let WMMR chatter about a band that meant more to a different version of this city. On the passenger seat, a paper bag from Carlino's with still warm ciabatta, a tub of marinated olives that will stain my fingers, a jar of San Marzano tomatoes I buy when I want to feel like, if I assemble the right ingredients, life will taste civilized. Graham had texted half an hour ago, "Let's be adults about this." Adults. It's a word you use when you've already done the childish thing and you want the other person to carry your dignity for you. I use Richmond Street as the location my brain goes to when it needs something ugly to focus on. Gritty row houses and wrapped stoops, and a phone pole with layers of staples like fish scales. I use Richmond and I breathe. But now, as the highway teases forward and then shuts down again, all I can think about is the glass door at Green Engine Coffee in Haverford, the way it reflected my own face back at me as I stood outside this morning with my hand on the handle, too late to decide not to open it. It's a Tuesday in May, and the azaleas on the mainline blowhards are aggressive about their right to be pink. Inside Green Engine, the light is that green and gold that makes everyone look like they're in the middle of an apology. Tessa's hair is back, practical and pretty. Graham, my husband, still, until we sign a thing, leans forward with his elbows on the table, his face arranged into the version of sincerity he sells to banks and zoning boards. His forefinger taps the side of his coffee cup the way it does when he's rehearsed a line and wants to make sure the other person knows it's coming. They both look up, and their pupils widen and then shrink like apertures. A man in a Villanova sweatshirt laughs too loud into his phone, and I realize for the first time how ruthless ambient noise can be. It makes every private disaster public. "Nora," Tessa says, my name a stone in her mouth. "Hey." I am not actually surprised. That part of the story is a lie we tell our friends later. I never saw it coming. We always see it coming. We just arrange the furniture around it and pretend we like the new layout. I set the bag with the ciabatta on their table because it gave my hands something to do and said, "So this is convenient. You're both here." Graham looks down at the bread like he wants to laugh with relief at being given a prop. "We were just talking about money," Tessa says, faster, and winces at her own interjection like she's walking into traffic. "The lease, the Highland Ave building." Of course, business first. The building where my job and Graham's company intersect like scissors. I sit. I do not ask permission. I do not spill anything, which feels like a small triumph. "The lease your firm drafted for Art Nest," I say. "The lease with the 19% escalator in year 3 that you slipped into the addendum with a cheerful clause title. The one our board didn't read because you sat at the head of the table and everyone wanted you to bless their project with your developer shine." Tessa's mouth does its tiny darting thing, left, right, previewing viewpoints she could adopt and discard. "We're not trying to hurt me," I offer, kind. "Not the plan, but here we are." Graham takes a breath, inhaling the roll. "Nora, the art space in Ardmore was always meant to be a bridge. It needs a permanent home. My firm can give it to you below market. This is a gift, even with escalators. That corridor is going to be completely different in 2 years. We're positioning ourselves to profit," I say. "And the kids whose parents can't afford to park for an hour at the new garage will find themselves priced out of arts access. But we won't say that in any press releases. We'll talk about activation and placemaking and vibrant corridors." Tessa's eyes flash with something that is not guilt. It is rage that feels like self-respect. "Don't you dare pretend you don't believe in Art Nest," she says. "You built the class's calendar. You brought in the high school mentors from Overbrook. You told me that day we got the PIC grant that you'd never felt more useful." "I feel a lot of things," I say. "Useful is not currently on the plate."
They have a script.
I know because we all lived together in the theater program at Lower Merion, and the second act of every play we did was built on a lie the audience accepted because we made it sound inevitable. Their script goes like this: the nonprofit needs stability. The developer can deliver a lease. There's a conflict, yes, but we'll disclose it in a paragraph on page 4 of the minutes, and everyone will nod because the minutes will not be sent until the day before the vote. Also in the script, they have been sleeping together, which I know the way I know where a body is under the ground, even before the dog starts digging. I'd seen a text the week prior. Nothing so obvious as "I miss your mouth," but a line about the porch light still on and a photograph of a hand I know as if it were my own. Tessa's, with the faint, pale scar across the knuckle where a dog at the DVR PC adoption fair nipped her because he was scared and she did not believe he would bite her. If we're choosing plain words, I say, and I hear myself the way you hear yourself on a voicemail you leave for a future emergency, tell me I am leaving my job at Art Nest at the end of the week before the board vote, and tell me you knew the board would vote, and tell me I am leaving my marriage before summer's over, and tell me you knew that too. Graham looks at Tessa because he has always outsourced the part where you tell the truth to the person most in touch with her own narrative. Tessa presses her thumbnail into her palm and looks at me in a way that suggests she might cry, but she doesn't. "Yes," she says, "I'm sorry." The thing about betrayal by people who also did beautiful things with you is that your body rebels against the data. Graham is the person who put his palm on my back at my mother's funeral and held me upright in the coat room when my niece decided to audition for Jelly. Tessa is the person who drove to South Philly at midnight and bought me a Wawa coffee and a soft pretzel when I got my first grant rejection and thought maybe I had built my entire personality on a joke that wasn't funny. Those things remain true while the new truth goes about its work. They were planning while they were consoling. I should go, I say, and stand. Because if you stay in scenes you don't belong in for longer than you must, you begin to believe that you deserve them. I say, I forgot to buy olives. Then realize I bought olives. Then realize the point is not olives. "Nora," Graham says, softer than he'd earned the right to be. "Let's be adults," I say. "Don't do the thing where you confuse tone for ethics." I get to the car and sit with my hands on the wheel, and the bread breathing its garlic near me like a creature who doesn't know better, and I catch myself looking into the rearview mirror not to adjust it, but to see my own eyes make a decision. The decision looks like not screaming. The decision looks like a list. At home in Wynwood, the house we rented because it had a porch the color of robin's eggs and a kitchen that forgave clumsy cooks, I go to the table and take out a legal pad because paper is what you use when you want to make thoughts behave. I write Art Nest at the top and then a column titled What I Know and another titled What I Can Prove. The no column blooms, headstrong. The prove column is stubborn, quiet, a child refusing to show off. What I know, the Highland Ave lease includes a stealth escalator that will outpace our finances by Q3. What I can prove, a draft addendum with the escalator circled in Tessa's notes, the board packet with the same language buried in Appendix B. What I know, Graham's firm, Mercer Whitcomb Properties, gets a management fee that looks like a tip. What I can prove, the line item in the pro forma and the footnote on page 6 that defines customary management expenses using words that do not define. What I know, the PIC grant and the CHG Charitable Fund both earmark funds for community access, not build-out. Using restricted funds for move-in would violate both letters I signed.
What I can prove? The grant agreements and the dates on ACH transfers that moved money into an account titled Highland Buildout on a day we didn't have board approval for that project. Also, betrayal, sleeping together. What I can prove there? I don't need to. That's the part everyone will pretend is gossip so they can ignore the part that matters. I write Pennsylvania right to know law and circle it, because when a nonprofit does business with a public entity or takes money that comes with public reporting, much of their conversation leaves footprints. I write Sunshine Act and underline it, because what boards do in public, they have to own. I write IRS 1309 and next to it, AG Charitable Trust section, and then because my brain insists on calibrating my courage with chores, I write laundry, dark cycle, and call Pico, and I feel myself return to my body. The call from Tessa comes late afternoon. I let it go to voicemail because I am building a habit. The message is both specific and useless. She loves me, she made a mistake, she still believes in the work. Can we talk when I'm ready? My finger hovers over delete, and then I tap save. Because someday someone might like to hear the voice that begged me to keep the story small. I go to the basement, where the washer and dryer sit like two heavy people bored with each other. While the water starts its predictable tug, I pull out a box I have not opened since we moved in. Mom papers. Inside, the deed from the Yadon house my mother delayed selling because she couldn't imagine herself without a porch. A stack of water-stained calendars with doctor's appointments circled in pink pen, a folder with the name of a West Philly attorney on it, Stone and Bell, who handled her probate. The smell of paper makes a sound in my throat I do not release. My mother would have told me to make a list. She would have told me not to let my anger do the cooking. Upstairs, I put on water for pasta and make Graham's favorite sauce, garlic, tomatoes, butter, out of muscle memory. Then remember, he is not my gentlest audience anymore. I add capers for myself like an act of petty sovereignty. When he comes home, he doesn't take off his shoes, and I know from the way he frames his shoulders that Tessa has prepared him for the idea that I am not hysterical enough to ignore the law.
He looks at the bread on the counter and then at me. "Nora," he says, choosing the voice he used when we were first tender with each other, as if he could return that voice to me like a deposit. "I'm not going to throw a plate," I say, to orient us. "I'm not going to ask you why. I'm not going to make you tell me when. I am going to ask you for two things. Do not try to charm the Art Nest board into voting on the lease at the meeting Thursday without putting the escalator in the first paragraph. And do not touch the restricted funds for build-out." He leans against the doorframe into the kitchen like he's posing for a lifestyle blog called Regret. "You think I want to hurt those kids?" he says. "You think I want to be a villain in your head?" "I think you want what you want," I say, "and you believe you can make the story ethical if you say it in a room with nice wood paneling." "What are you going to do?" he asks, his voice thinner. "I'm going to tell the truth, in the formats required by the people who can't ignore it," I say. "I will be fair. That's not the same as being kind." He takes a breath to say something and then looks down at the sauce in the pan, sees the capers, and chooses a different conversation. "I'll stay with Jamie," he says, his college roommate in Queen Village, the one who never took his Christmas lights down and calls every woman mama in a tone he thinks is harmless. "Just for a few days." "Good idea," I say. He sets his keys on the hook next to the door like a man checking himself into a story he won't be allowed to co-author. He goes upstairs and comes down with the duffel. He stands at the threshold 6 seconds longer than necessary. He looks at me like he is walking a child across the street and isn't sure which way cards come from. "I'll call you," he says.
Have your lawyer call my lawyer. Not because I have a lawyer, but because it is one of the sentences that rearranges a room. He leaves. The house exhales and immediately becomes bigger than a person can reasonably fill. The next morning, I take SEPTA into the city. The Powley-Thorndale line is a rosary of towns I can recite without thinking. Ardmore, Wynwood, Narberth, Marion, Overbrook, 30th Street. On the platform, a boy in a Lower Merion crew hoodie stares at his phone like it will deliver him mercy. An older woman in a coat that has seen a lot of Junes covers a Tupperware with foil. I imagine it's brownies for a waiting room. The train arrives with its familiar squeal that announces its reluctance. I sit by a window and watch us slip past backyards and swing sets and the wet edge of a little stream snarled with honeysuckle. At 30th Street Station, everyone is in motion with the particular efficiency that happens when you know exactly where you're going. I walk east down Market to 15th, down to JFK, and into the Municipal Services Building, where a security guard asks me to put my bag on the belt and then nods at me like we are old friends because this is a city that appreciates repeat business. I take the elevator up to the office of the city commissioners because I need the forms for a right-to-know request, and even though I can download them, I want to look the clerk in the eye and hand him a paper that says my name. RTK? He asks, and I feel seen. 2, I say, sliding the requests I drafted, one for any communications between ArtNest and the Department of Public Property, and one for any emails between Nora Whitcomb Properties and the Department of Licenses and Inspections regarding Highland Avenue. From January last year to present, electronic. I'll pay copying fees if necessary. He stamps them with a small, satisfying thud that feels like someone somewhere agreeing that sentences can be currency. You'll get an acknowledgement by email. 5 business days. Back in the bright, I buy a coffee at La Colombe I can't afford but need and sit on a bench outside City Hall where the pigeons organize their small committee. I open my laptop to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's website, Charitable Trusts and Organizations. The complaint form asks for the organization's name, its EIN if I have it, I do. It's tucked into the back of every Form 990 like a tattoo, a description of the alleged misuse of funds. I write the verbs first because it makes me feel like the world still has skeletons. Diverted, mischaracterized, escalated, omitted. I attach the grant agreements. I attach the board packet with the escalator. I attach a screenshot of a Slack exchange where someone from finance says, "Can we call this program support for CHG? That'll keep the monthly report pretty." I don't send it yet. I email it to myself with the subject line, "For when you're brave." I stand up. I walk around City Hall because it is a box with an old heart in the middle. William Penn up there with his hat, asking you to remember to say please and mean it. In Narberth that evening, the ArtNest board meets in the back room of a synagogue that rents its off hours to anyone trying to fix a small part of the world. The folding chairs are arranged in a semicircle in a way that pretends there are no corners. The exact spring Trader Joe's hummus and unsliced baby carrots, which tells you everything about their relationship to patience. I bring a yellow pad and sit near the end. Tessa opens with gratitude and then slides into the language she's perfected. Impact, sustainability, partnership, our kids. Graham is not here, which is both relief and proof that optics are our most literal art. We review the program report, we nod at the line about the high school mural cohort, and we photograph a page for the Instagram story because donors like to see kids painting more than they like to read about kids reading. When we get to new business, Tessa looks me dead in the face before she speaks. She thinks it is a kindness. The Highland Ave lease, she says, chin up, has been negotiated below market with a trusted partner. We recommend board approval pending legal review. I raise my hand because my body knows its roles. Student, grant manager, the girl who sits in the front row and sometimes ruins your morning with her questions. The escalator in year 3, I say gently. Is it still 19%? And the management fee, can we see the breakdown? Also, have we verified that restricted funds will not be used for build-out? A board member who once gave us $10,000 because his daughter loved our pottery class and because he liked to be seen at fundraisers clears his throat. Nora, he says, like a father. We trust Mercer Whitcomb. This is what it costs to live in Ardmore now. The kids will benefit from the visibility. We are leaning into our future. Visibility doesn't pay rent. And leaning into our future is a phrase people use right before they take out a loan they shouldn't. Tessa's mouth tightens. She appreciates the rigor, she says, which is what people say when they want you to stop. We'll table the vote until next week to allow for an addendum review. In the meantime, Nora has decided to pursue new opportunities and will be celebrating her contributions. I haven't decided, I say. You did. But it's very generous of you to offer to celebrate me. The quiet in the room is a living creature. It nudges ankles. It has a collar, but no one can read the name. We adjourned early because the light outside is a show and because people like to escape civic discomfort with a glass of wine. In the hallway, Tessa touches my elbow, and I pull away because I'm teaching my body new tricks. You're better than this, she says, and I realize she means better than public confrontation, better than being the woman who refuses to be above the fray. I think, you confuse above with aside. At least put the escalator in the first paragraph, I say, and walk to my car. On Haverford Avenue, a girl on a purple bike with yellow streamers pedals past with her father steadying the seat with 2 fingers, the most delicate leash. In my head, the list reorganizes itself into something that looks like a plan. Tomorrow, find a lawyer who knows where the charitable trust's teeth are. Gather every email with the phrase restricted funds and tag them. Pull the Form 990s from Mercer Whitcomb's friendly LLCs and find the related party footnotes we ignore because we want to believe the people we eat muffins with on Saturday mornings will never use a special purpose entity to clean up their story. At home, I open a fresh document and title it Art Nest Internal Timeline, Nora Whitcomb. I put dates next to the facts and facts next to the dates. I start for the first time not to feel like a woman drowning, but like a lifeguard who has noticed that the riptide is a pattern, and patterns can be named, and names can be printed on signs. At midnight, Graham texts. Please don't make this ugly. I stare at it and feel something settle, then lift. I type, I won't. I'm going to make it accurate. Blessed are the records, I think. Blessed is the right to know clock. Blessed is the township agenda PDF and the sonorous voice of the person who reads new business like someone we can all trust to meet us where we are. The first train of the next day will slide into Narberth Station with the sound like a hinge rethinking its purpose. I will be there with a folder, a pen, and a thermos of coffee I made myself because I cannot trust the cafe not to serve me eye contact I haven't earned. If I do this right, my revenge will look like risk management. If I do this right, nobody will clap. Somebody will change a line item. And somewhere a kid making a pinch pot will not have to move studios because grown-ups fell in love with an escalator clause.
By 7, the light over Lancaster Avenue is that thin Philadelphia gold that makes even the cracked plaster on old storefronts look holy. I walk to the Narberth Wawa for coffee because I need the ordinary choreography. Push the button, watch the stream, lid, sleeve, napkin. The man at the register calls me hun in a way that could only be menacing if you didn't grow up here. On the way back, a SEPTA conductor leans out of the Paoli Thorndale and does that 2-finger whistle that sounds like summer, even in winter. My body believes in trains even when my brain doesn't. At the kitchen table, I lay out my binder like a ritual. Tabs and colors that mean something only to me. Lease, grants, board policy, emails, RTKOOR 990. I slide a fresh legal pad under the clip and write the date like that will keep the day from spilling. My phone is a small aquarium of unread. 2 acknowledgement emails from the city about my right to know requests. A reply from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's charitable trust section
We received your submission, an analyst will review, and a message from a woman named Mariah from the Pick Foundation asking for a time to connect. The law firm smells like lemon and books that have been touched by careful hands. Adler and Finch, 16th and Walnut, 4th floor, windows looking down at a city that has learned to wear beauty like a thrifted coat. Rachel Adler meets me in flats and a navy dress with pockets, an omen in itself. She has the kind of face that suggests she knows what you're going to say and is prepared to like you anyway. Nonprofit law, she says, after she's poured water that actually tastes like water. The corner of the universe where words like reasonable and fair go to be misused. Talk to me. I talk. I stick to nouns. Lease, escalator, restricted funds, management fee, Mercer Whitcomb, Highland Ave. I explain Artnest's conflict of interest policy. A board member must disclose and recuse. Transactions with an interested person must be demonstrably fair and in the organization's best interest. I do not say slept with, because I am here to talk about money and duty and paperwork that makes men nervous. Rachel writes in long, elegant arcs. Okay, she says, we're in classic conflict territory. Under federal law, Internal Revenue Code Section 4958, transactions where a 501c3 confers an excess benefit on a disqualified person, board member, officer, someone with substantial influence, trigger intermediate sanctions. The disqualified person can be taxed up to 25% of the excess. If it's not corrected, 200%. Managers who knowingly approved can face $10,000 penalties. Pennsylvania overlays that with the nonprofit corporation law, duty of loyalty, duty of care. And your board's own conflict policy is a contract with itself. Violating it is not just bad manners, it's failure of governance. What counts as excess, I ask, although I can feel the answer in the bones of my day. Fair market value is the test, she says. You need comparability data, similar leases, independent appraisal, bids, documentation and minutes, recusal. If they've skipped those steps, they're tap dancing on a trapdoor. As for restricted funds, donors can demand reclassification or return. Charitable Trust takes that seriously. What can I do, I ask, besides leave and write furious emails from my couch that no one reads? She smiles. Not kindly, exactly. Accurately. You draft a memo to the Audit Governance Committee with exhibits, the escalator, the management fee language, the grants agreements. You ask for immediate recusal of Mr. Whitcomb and artless documentation. You request independent counsel, someone who does not advise Mercer Whitcomb, to review the transaction. You ask them to commission an appraisal and issue an RFP to test the market. You put the restricted funds in a separate bucket pending review. If they ignore you, we press. AG's office, donors, maybe media later, but not now. Keep adjectives to a minimum. Do not use fraud. Use non-compliant, inaccurate, undocumented. Also, Pennsylvania's whistleblower law protects employees of entities receiving public funds who report wrongdoing. 43 PS Esquire 1421 ECX. It's not a magic cloak, but it's a jacket. Wear it. You're my person, I say, and it comes out more like a statement of relief than a compliment. We sign an engagement letter. She hands me a template for a demand for compliance letter that makes my pulse slow. There's comfort in the polite menace of a good template. At noon, I meet Mariah from the Pick Foundation at Elixir on Sydenham. She's younger than me by 7 years and carries a canvas tote with the phrase, "Mutual aid is not a trend." We sit under a ficus, trying its best.
I'm not calling to pull funding, she says quickly, before I've even unfolded my binder. I'm calling because I have to stop disbursements when I hear restricted funds and build out in the same sentence, and nobody can show me a budget. Convince me I shouldn't flip the switch to paused. I can't, I say, and her eyebrows rise. I can't convince you to send money you earmarked for program scholarships to a landlord I sleep next to. I can ask you to hold it while an independent committee gets us a compliant transaction. I slide 2 pages across. The paragraph from the PIC agreement, a screenshot of the internal email wanting to call it program support because that kept the monthly report pretty. She reads without theatricality. She's someone who learned to appreciate restraint early. I appreciate your specificity, she says. Send me a written update when the board forms the committee. We'll freeze pending that.
If they try to spend it anyway, we send to charitable trusts. Already CC'd, I say. We look at each other. I feel the faint, almost imperceptible shifts of having a grown-up on my side. The Office of Open Records refuses to be dramatic, but it has its own tiny thrill. In the afternoon, the city's acknowledgement pings. Received, due within 5 business days, certain exemptions may apply. This is America. We put useful things inside parentheticals and expect you to find them. On the way back to the train, I detour through Rittenhouse Square, where a man in a suit throws a ball for a lab like he believes in redemption. I think of my mother taking me to the Barnes when it was still in Marion and telling me to press my nose an inch from the Renoirs and then back up slowly until the chaos became intention. Perspective is a verb, she said. I write it in the margin of my legal pad without realizing my hand is moving. At 5, Lower Marion Township Building and Planning Committee convenes in a room that smells like wood, old decisions, and coffee that's waited too long. On the agenda, Highland Ave, conditional use for an extra story on a mixed-use project anchored by a community arts tenant. The room fills with a 2-to-1 ratio, neighbors with reasonable complaints about parking and people who suspect that progress is just greed and new shoes. I scribble in the margin of the agenda. This is where they'll say we need them. This is where you ask what need costs. Graham sits 3 rows up on the right, suit that says compromise, hair that says he slept. A land use attorney with a precise tie knot does the applicant presentation. Vibrant corridor, he says. Amenity rich. He says public-private partnership. The slides show renderings with glossy trees and children implied. I sign up for public comment. When they call my name, I walk to the microphone with a paper that shakes just enough to betray that I still have blood. Nora Whitcomb, Winwood. I work for ArtNest, present tense on purpose. And I'm here to ask that you condition any approvals on transparency around the anchor lease and actual community benefits. If a nonprofit tenant is being used to justify additional density, show the math. Independent appraisal, bidding, a community ticketing plan for families who don't currently feel welcome in this zip code. Also, please note, I have serious concerns about restricted funds being used for build-out. That's not your jurisdiction, but it is your neighborhood. A commissioner with a nice watch nods as if nodding were a binding vote. He says, "Thank you for your passion." Another asks if the applicant is willing to commit to a community discount plan in concept. The lawyer says, "We're open to discussion," which is to say, no, but with better lighting. Outside, after, a woman with a stroller catches my elbow. I'm Zoe. I teach at Penn Valley Elementary. My kids love ArtNest. Thank you for... We always think those rooms are for other people. They're not, I promise. The letter to the board writes itself with Rachel's template as its spine. Subject line, demand for compliance with conflict of interest policy, request for independent review and preservation of restricted funds. I attach exhibits and number them like fussy jewels. Exhibit A, lease addendum escalator clause, 19% year 3. Exhibit B, management fee language. Exhibit C, PIC grant agreement, program scholarships restriction. Exhibit D, internal email regard program support, because that kept the monthly report pretty. Exhibit E, ArtNest conflict of interest policy. Exhibit F, IRS 4958 summary. Exhibit G, comparables, 3 leases within a mile. The body is a sermon without inflection. Acknowledge Mr. Whitcomb's status as disqualified person under 4958 and interested person under ArtNest policy. Demand recusal from all discussions and votes v. Highland Ave. Demand independent counsel and independent appraiser. Demand issuance of RFP to test market. Demand segregation, freeze of restricted funds pending review. Remind board of Sunshine Act obligations, re-public notice if a vote will be taken. I CC the audit committee chair, the governance chair, and Tessa, because politeness can be a blade. I CC Rachel. I do not CC Graham because he knows. 15 minutes later, an email from counsel@mercerwhitcomb.com pings with a subject that tries hard to be brave. Cease and desist, defamatory interference. It cites phrases I didn't use, fraud, self-dealing, and threatens action if I interfere with existing and prospective contractual relations. Rachel's reply is the only thing that calms me. We represent Miss Whitcomb. Your client is a disqualified person. Any attempt to intimidate a protected whistleblower will be included in correspondence with the AG. Future communications to my client should come through me. The delight I take in someone else's formality will sustain me for days.
The donors are their own ecosystem. CHG Charitable Fund's program officer, Mr. DeMarco, picks a table at Vernick Coffee Bar and offers me a water and the kind of eye contact that says he used to be a social worker. I want to trust Artnest, he says. I want to trust you more. You can, I say, and hand him a one-page summary. I'm not asking you to punish us. I'm asking you to insist on governance that lets me sleep. Considerate insisted, he says, and writes hold in a neat hand on his grant spreadsheet, which I try not to read upside down because I am that kind of person and also try not to be. Tessa calls, and I don't answer. She texts, we can amend the escalator, lower it. We can put a cap. Meet me? I imagine the negotiation like a swap meet. My ethics for their optics. Rachel says, do not get in a boat with a person who has a hole in their hull. I send back, all changes through independent counsel. Also, put the escalator and fee detail in the first paragraph of any board summary. At night, in my mother's old house papers, I find a copy of a letter she wrote to a church board about a heating system bid. Even in the 90s, she was telling men in town to get a second estimate. Bless you, I say to the past. I write Mom in the margin of my list and underline it twice. The ArtNet's board schedules an emergency meeting for Saturday morning in the basement of the synagogue again. Someone brings bagels, someone brings fear dressed as expedients. We sit in the semicircle. The air conditioner kicks on and off like a metronome for decisions. Tessa opens. We've received a letter from Miss Whitcomb, she says, professional, and for a moment I think that honorific is a kindness that tastes like acid. We've engaged independent counsel, Bressler Law, to advise the board. We're also commissioning an appraisal. In light of questions around restricted funds, we're freezing disbursement from those accounts. She swallows, we had hoped to vote the lease today. We won't. Graham is not in the room. His chair at the table is not empty. It is absent. The difference is louder. Bressler, a silver-haired woman with a pen that costs as much as a week of groceries, clears her throat. Best practice here. Recusal of Mr. Whitcomb, formation of a special committee of disinterested directors, minutes that reflect deliberation, comparability data. If, after review, the terms are still favorable, you can proceed. If not, you renegotiate or you find another space. As for restricted funds, no build-out expenses until you have written donor consent. The AG's office has reached out. You will cooperate. A board member I didn't expect much of, Ellen, a pediatrician whose voice usually gets drowned out by men who like to pronounce strategy like it owes them money, raises her hand. Also, she says, let's stop saying our kids if we can't look those kids' parents in the face and explain in plain language how this benefits them. I don't want to be a doctor in a commercial for a pill with a beautiful side effect and a terrible cost. The chair looks like a person who hasn't been told no by anyone but a dentist. He nods anyway because he senses the wind. We'll vote to constitute the special committee, he says, and does. It passes. Unanimous. Tessa records the motion. She does not look at me. It's not negging, it's self-preservation. After, in the bright late morning, outside, under a tree with more history in its trunk than most of our meetings, Tessa catches me with a look that says she's been trying on sentences in her head, and none of them fit. I'm angry with you, she says. I know. I'm angry with me for putting us in a story where I have to be
tedious to be brave. She laughs once in that way women do when they recognize they have been cast against their will. This is going to take forever, she says. Good, I say. Maybe we'll stop confusing speed with competence. Sunday, my father calls from Ohio to tell me he planted tomatoes and the deer will make a mockery of him. I tell him about fines that are really taxes and taxes that are really fines, and he says governments have better names for things than people do. And I say sometimes. And then we exchange the inventory of small duties we've accomplished, a haircut, a drawer organized, a bill paid, and it feels like penance for all the weeks we couldn't control.
The Office of Open Records sends a docket number because the city has invoked an extension. We will respond within 30 days, the email says. I put the docket number on a Post-it and stick it to the fridge like a child's drawing, proof that my government is busy with me. I mark the deadline on my calendar because my brain eats days when I'm not looking. Midweek, I get a scanned copy of ArtNest's Form 990 from last year, annotated by a friend at a local accounting firm who owes me for a last-minute grant budget I built for their client. Schedule L, transactions with interested persons, lists none. Schedule O explains the conflict of interest policy in the bland cadences of people who haven't had to test it. Board members annually sign, disclose, recuse. In my head, I practice a sentence for later. You will have to file an amended 990 with a Schedule L and a narrative that doesn't sound like it was written by a bored cushion. Graham texts twice, both times trying on the trousers of contrition and finding they itch. I'm not your enemy, he writes. Then, this hurts me too. I type and delete 4 responses, settle on, you are a person with choices. Choose. The board is choosing. I'm done being a rubber stamp with a pulse. The special committee meets without me, as it should. They hire an appraiser I've heard of and trust. They issue an RFP that gets posted on a website only people like me watch. 2 landlords bite. Nora Whitcomb sends revisions. Escalator down to 8% in year 3, management fee described in detail, a promise, hilarious, to partner on community ticketing. They include a clause that says, tenant acknowledges that developers' costs reflect market realities. I feel the urge to write in the margins like a child, market realities are a choice. I don't. On Friday, Mariah from PIC emails, we're good to release next tranche once independent committee approves a compliant lease. Thank you for letting process eat your weekend. I forward it to Rachel with a heart I pretend I didn't type. That night, I walk past the Highland Ave site to see what I'm fighting about. A chain-link fence, a banner with a rendering of a life that looks plausible, a few orange cones askew like someone gave up arranging them halfway through the chore. I stand there a long minute, hands in my pockets against a not quite warm breeze, and understand with uninflected clarity that my revenge has already happened. It's in the minutes. It's in the pause. It's in the fact that a group of adults who are used to liking each other's ideas had to stop and put numbers on them. At home, the binder sits under the lamp like a pet that can't sleep unless it hears you breathe. I slide in the latest. OOR docket sheet, AG acknowledgement, a printed email from Bressler with bullet points that read like medicine directions. I put the cap on my pen. I look at the clock. I do the math. I exhale. Somewhere, a train shrieks at a curve it takes every day, and people in the car look up and then down and keep going. Because this is the sound of a city trying to be itself. I think, with the holy absence of adjectives, good.